This is Matthew Kratter's Bitcoin University. Today I want to talk about the insane Bitcoin MicroStrategy Nasdaq 100 feedback loop. Disclaimer, I own Bitcoin, I own BTC, but I don't own any MicroStrategy stock because I prefer bearer assets over stocks. This video, if you haven't watched my other videos on MicroStrategy and want to understand a little bit better about how the company works and what their investment strategy is, I'll put a link to this playlist in the description notes below. But today we're going to be talking about MicroStrategy being added to the Nasdaq 100 and why this is so significant. It's going to be added to the index on December 23rd alongside Palantir and Taser maker Axon Enterprise. And I hope you can enjoy the irony as much as I do that it's going to be replacing a biotech stock like Moderna. What is the Nasdaq 100? It's basically a basket of stocks, in other words, a stock market index containing the biggest and most important stocks that trade on the Nasdaq stock exchange, weighted mostly by market cap. So the larger the market cap, the larger the weighting in the index. We can see here that the top index components include the big tech stocks like Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Broadcom, Amazon, Meta, Tesla down at number 7. So this is a stock market index. There are different ways to get exposure to it. You can get exposure to it by buying an index mutual fund, or you can get exposure to something like the Nasdaq 100 or another stock market index by buying an index ETF. And in this case, the Nasdaq 100, you can get exposure to it by buying the QQQs, which trade like a stock, but they track the index, the Nasdaq 100 index. Investing in stock market indices is the foundation of modern passive investing, which was invented and popularized by Jack Bogle, often called the father of index funds, and he's the founder of Vanguard, passed away a few years ago. As we'll see, that's sort of ironic that Vanguard is involved in this whole thing. So passive investing is the opposite of active investing. Active investing, you try to pick stocks, you try to buy stocks that will outperform the market. Passive investing, you just buy the market itself. In this case, a representative sampling of stocks like a stock market index like the Nasdaq 100 in the form of the QQQs or mutual fund. Passive investing has become the biggest game in town recently, surpassing active investing in January of this year of 2024 when passive funds finally overtook active funds in the US. So the way it works, if you're going to invest, for example, in the Nasdaq 100 by buying $100 worth of the QQQs, when you invest that will end up buying the equivalent of $8.85 worth of Apple, $7.80 worth of Microsoft, $7.72 worth of Nvidia, and now also 47 cents worth of MicroStrategy after it is added to the index on December 23rd, 2024. And where I'm getting these numbers from, if you invest $100, for example, in the Nasdaq 100, this is the weighting for Apple, 8.85%. So that's why I'm saying you're getting $8.85 worth of the stock when you buy it. We'll see in a moment why it's so significant that these passive index flows are going into MicroStrategy, or will be going into MicroStrategy once it's part of the index. But before we do that, if you're finding this video helpful so far, I just ask you to help to support this channel's educational mission. Hit the subscribe button. That really does help the channel out a lot. Leave a like, leave a comment, question, suggestion for a future video, and share this video with a friend or family member. So as we said, the weighting in the Nasdaq 100 for MicroStrategy will start out at 0.47%, which is why I was talking about the number that if $100 is invested in the QQQs, 47 cents of that would go into MicroStrategy stock. So why is this important? As we said, most investment flows these days are passive. So for example, money gets taken out of your paycheck for your 401k in the US, and then that money gets automatically invested in, for example, a bond index, and then maybe a stock index like the S&P 500 or the Nasdaq 100. And so now with the addition of MicroStrategy stock to the Nasdaq 100, this means that these passive investing flows will be driving up the stock price and increasing the liquidity of MicroStrategy, which will then issue more stock at their ATM offerings, or they'll issue more convertible bonds or plain vanilla bonds, and then use the proceeds to buy more Bitcoin, thus continuing to help to drive up the purchasing power, the price of Bitcoin denominated in fiat. So what we can see here is a price appreciation flywheel or feedback loop that leads from passive stock index investing flows directly into Bitcoin. the more BTC that MicroStrategy accumulates and the more the price of BTC appreciates, the larger MicroStrategy's weighting will become the Nasdaq 100, because remember, this is a market cap weighted index for the most part. So companies with larger market caps have larger weightings and more influence on the performance of the index. I like this analogy here. I give my dogs his meds, his medicine wrapped in cheese. QQQ is the cheese, MicroStrategy is the meds. Index investors are the dogs not knowing what's best for them. Or this version, QQQs are the dog, MicroStrategy is the cheese, and Bitcoin is the meds. So what MicroStrategy is doing is it's helping to inject some Bitcoin into the portfolios of people everywhere, or if not, Bitcoin itself, price exposure to the price appreciation of Bitcoin. And MicroStrategy is helping to inject some of this into the portfolios of people everywhere, whether they know it or not. I love this meme. They don't even know they're buying Bitcoin. Here's the QQQs. Also this meme from Stephen Lubka. Paul Krugman now owns Bitcoin. Nouriel Roubini now owns Bitcoin. Jamie Dimon does. Jerome Powell, Elizabeth Warren now owns Bitcoin. Thank you, Michael Saylor. To the extent that these people own some index funds like the Nasdaq 100 in their retirement. And I think they have to disclose this publicly. So I imagine they do now have all this Bitcoin price exposure, in spite of the fact that these are some of the biggest critics of Bitcoin over the years. People over at the Reddit, our investing part of Reddit, are also quite upset about this. This is not a good thing. Someone writes in, this is like when CDOs were being held by the big banks across Wall Street. Of course, not understanding the difference here between a bearer asset like Bitcoin and fixed income instruments that are highly levered derivatives. So not the most sophisticated people here. John Doe writes, watching normies imploding on our investing on Reddit because MicroStrategy was added to QQQs is gold. For people who are upset, for QQQ holders who are upset about this, I have some advice. Easy solution for these boggleheads, which is what you sometimes call stock index investors. When they buy the QQQs, they can just take out a separate short on MicroStrategy. Again, not a great idea. Or they could buy the QQQs and short Bitcoin itself to get its exposure out of their portfolio. Just a small amount, obviously, relative to the size of their QQQ position. But this is obviously quite foolish. This is not, if you were to do this spread trade, you'd actually want to be long MicroStrategy and long Bitcoin and short the QQQs. That's probably what will outperform over the long term. But for people who don't want this exposure to Bitcoin in their QQQs, this is the very dumb and easy solution for them. Now here's even better news. When the QQQ does well and when MicroStrategy does well, hodlers of real Bitcoin in cold storage like you and me do really well as well. Global Bitcoin adoption means that Bitcoin will infiltrate every nook and cranny of the financial system, ending up on the balance sheets of households, corporations like MicroStrategy, pensions, endowments, central banks, and even countries, as we are already seeing in the race to accumulate Bitcoin that we've been seeing recently. And there's some rumors that there are some Middle Eastern countries that are now pursuing Bitcoin quite aggressively, shall we say. I think this is pretty ironic, of course, that index investing, which was invented essentially by Jack Bogle and Vanguard, is now helping to pump Bitcoin, and Vanguard is too stupid or too stubborn to invest it. So they're still putting out reports how Bitcoin has no role in retirement portfolios. Unfortunately for them, Bitcoin is now in everyone's retirement portfolio to the extent that MicroStrategy has exposure to it, and MicroStrategy is about to become part of the QQQs. So in conclusion, the inclusion of MicroStrategy in the Nasdaq 100 means that investors and funds will now be automatically allocating capital to an index that contains a company that will be automatically allocating this capital to Bitcoin. And you can only guess what happens when the larger components of the QQQs, like Apple and Amazon and Microsoft, start to add Bitcoin to their balance sheets. Shareholders of Microsoft recently voted against it, but all of these companies eventually are going to come on board once they figure this thing out. So when the larger components of the QQQ start to add Bitcoin to their balance sheets, this will pump Bitcoin itself, which will pump companies inside the QQQs that are holding Bitcoin even more, etc. So this is really the crazy flywheel that is started. We already have Tesla owning almost 10,000 Bitcoin, which is not a huge amount relative to its market cap, but this is another example of a QQQ company that does have some exposure to to Bitcoin. Tesla currently almost 5% of the index. So if they were to get their Bitcoin accumulation strategy restarted, then they would be contributing to this flywheel as well. And then, of course, the ultimate goal or the next step would be to have MicroStrategy included in the S&P 500, which is even a larger and more highly allocated to index than the QQQs. The problem with this is one of the inclusion requirements is it has to demonstrate, MicroStrategy has to demonstrate that they've been gap profitable they have to be gap profitable for the last 4 quarters. The problem with the way Bitcoin accounting has worked up until this point, really up until December 15th of this year, is that you had to mark it down on your balance sheet if the price of Bitcoin went down, and then you could not mark it back up if the price of Bitcoin went up. But with this FASB accounting change, which just went into effect on December 15th, 2024, this FASB reporting will be available to MicroStrategy beginning with their earnings in the first quarter of 2025, as Adam Back points out here. And what this means is as Bitcoin appreciates, you will see those gains flow through to the income statement. And so this could definitely help. I don't know if they have to be counted as operating earnings for the S&P 500 committee, but at some point it seems to me inevitable that MicroStrategy will be added, not just to the QQQs, which we now know will happen in December, but will also be added to the S&P 500. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.